For 22 years, I believed I was living the American dream until the night I discovered my husband's secret that would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the man sleeping next to me. My name is Sarah, and at 51, I thought I had it all figured out. My husband Mark and I had built what everyone called the perfect marriage: a beautiful colonial house in the suburbs of Connecticut, 2 successful careers, and a daughter who just graduated from Yale. Mark was a respected financial advisor, and I was a senior marketing executive at a Fortune 500 company. We attended charity galas, hosted dinner parties, and our neighbors envied what they saw as our unshakable bond. But perfection, I've learned, is often just an expertly crafted illusion. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday evening in October, when Mark's phone buzzed during dinner. He grabbed it with an urgency I'd never seen before, his face paling as he read the message. "Work emergency," he muttered, but his hands were trembling as he typed back. Since when did financial emergencies make my composed husband shake like a leaf? The second red flag came 3 days later when I found a receipt in his jacket pocket, not for his usual haunts, but for an expensive lingerie store, Victoria's Secret, $347 on a Thursday afternoon when he'd told me he was in client meetings. My heart hammered as I stared at the receipt, because I hadn't received any gifts lately. Who was Mark buying delicate silk and lace for, and why did he feel the need to lie about it? That weekend, I noticed how he clutched his phone during our morning coffee, typing messages with a secretive smile I hadn't seen in years. When I jokingly asked who was making him so happy, his face went cold and he snapped that I was being paranoid. But paranoid people don't usually find lingerie receipts hidden in jacket pockets, do they? Something was very wrong in our picture-perfect world. The final warning came when our daughter, Emma, called from New York, casually mentioning she'd tried to reach her father at his office on Friday afternoon, but his secretary said he'd been out of the office all week. Yet Mark had left each morning in his business suits, kissing me goodbye and promising to be home by 6. Where had my husband of 22 years been spending his days? That night, as Mark showered, his phone lit up with a text from M, and the preview showed an image that made my blood freeze. My husband's wedding ring sitting on an unfamiliar nightstand next to a woman's manicured hand wearing the exact bracelet I'd admired in Tiffany's window last month. I screenshotted the message before it disappeared, my hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. This wasn't just an affair. This was a calculated deception involving gifts I'd admired, time I thought was ours, and promises that were nothing but lies. As I heard the shower turn off, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront him, cry, or beg for explanations. Instead, I was going to do something far more devastating. I was going to become the student of my husband's deception, and then I was going to become his teacher. But first, I needed to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went.
They say knowledge is power, but as I began unraveling my husband's lies, I discovered that some knowledge cuts so deep it changes you forever, and not always for the better. The next morning, I watched Mark kiss my cheek goodbye, the same ritual we'd performed for 2 decades. But now I saw it differently. His lips felt like ice against my skin, and his "I love you" sounded like a rehearsed line from a play I didn't know I was starring in. As soon as his car disappeared down our tree-lined street, I began the most important investigation of my life. I started with our joint credit card statements, spreading them across our mahogany dining table like evidence in a crime scene. The pattern emerged immediately. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels during business trips that lasted suspiciously long, and flower purchases that never made it to our home. Each line item was a knife twist, but I forced myself to document everything. How many romantic dinners had he shared with her while telling me he was working late? My hands shook as I discovered charges for a couple's spa treatments,
expensive wine, and jewelry from stores I'd only dreamed of visiting. But the most devastating discovery was a charge for a weekend getaway at the Mohonk Mountain House, our anniversary destination from our honeymoon year, the place where we'd promised to return every 5 years. The dates showed he'd been there just last month, while I'd spent that weekend alone, believing he was at a financial conference in Boston. I hired a private investigator that afternoon, a stern woman named Patricia, who specialized in marital infidelity. Her first question cut straight to the bone. "Mrs. Anderson, are you prepared for what we might find? Because in my experience, the truth is usually worse than our worst fears." I told her I was ready, but nothing could have prepared me for the photographs she showed me a week later. The woman wasn't just anyone. She was Monica, our family accountant, the woman who'd sat in our living room helping us plan our retirement, who'd hugged me at Christmas parties, who'd looked me in the eye and complimented my dress while secretly planning to steal my life. But here's what neither Mark nor Monica knew. As our family's financial planner, I had access to every investment, every retirement account, and every business decision Mark had made, and I'd just discovered something that would make their little love affair the most expensive mistake of their lives. That evening, as Mark complained about his stressful day at the office, I smiled and asked if he wanted wine with dinner. He had no idea that I now held 22 years of evidence in my hands, or that I'd spent the afternoon consulting with the best divorce attorney in Connecticut. His perfect life was about to become his perfect nightmare. And the best part? He was going to hand me the weapons to destroy him. Nothing prepares you for the moment you realize your entire marriage has been a performance, and you've been the only one not acting. Armed with Patricia's surveillance photos and my own financial discoveries, I began to see my husband's double life in stunning, sickening detail. Mark wasn't just having an affair. He was living an entirely separate existence, complete with romantic traditions, inside jokes, and future plans that didn't include me. The photos showed them at our favorite restaurant, sitting at our table, sharing the same dessert Mark and I had enjoyed on our first anniversary. In another image, Monica wore my mother's vintage necklace, the one Mark had borrowed for an estate jewelry appraisal that never happened. But the most gut-wrenching photo showed them looking at engagement rings, Monica's face glowing with the same joy I'd felt 23 years ago. I found their secret apartment through the credit card trail, a luxury condo downtown that Mark had been renting for 8 months. 8 months of lying to my face. 8 months of working late. 8 months of me cooking dinner for a ghost. Patricia's surveillance revealed their routine. Mark would leave work at 3 p.m., spend the afternoon playing house with Monica, then return home to me by 7 p.m. with practice stories about traffic and difficult clients. The bank records revealed the true scope of his deception. Mark had been systematically moving money from our joint accounts into an offshore account accessible to both him and Monica. Our retirement savings reduced by 60%. Our daughter's trust fund completely emptied. The college fund we'd built for future grandchildren transferred to an account with both their names on it. He wasn't just cheating on me, he was stealing from our family's future to fund his fantasy life. But the cruelest discovery was the timeline. Their affair had started the week after our daughter's graduation, the same weekend Mark had held me while I cried happy tears about our new chapter together. While I'd been planning romantic getaways for our empty nest years, he'd been planning his escape with the woman who'd been stealing from us both, financially and emotionally. Then I found their text messages. Patricia had managed to clone his phone and discovered they'd been planning to disappear together the day after our upcoming 23rd wedding anniversary, leaving me with nothing but debt and a note claiming Mark was following his heart. But Mark had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, he'd shared every detail of their plan with Monica via text, including the location of their secret accounts and their planned new identities. He'd handed me the blueprint to destroy them both. That night, as Mark showered off the scent of another woman, I sat in our bedroom, the same room where we dreamed about growing old together, and planned his destruction. He wanted to follow his heart. I was about to show him exactly where his broken promises would lead him.
They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but as I prepared to destroy the two people who'd stolen my life, I discovered that the coldest revenge requires the warmest smile. For 3 weeks, I became an actress in my own home, perfecting the role of the oblivious wife while orchestrating the most elaborate takedown of my life. Every morning kiss, every "How was your day, honey?" every shared laugh over dinner was a calculated performance designed to keep Mark comfortable while I prepared his downfall. I documented everything with the precision of a federal prosecutor. Their text messages revealed not just the affair, but also how they'd been embezzling money from Mark's clients, using our family accounts as a laundering mechanism. Monica had been falsifying our books while Mark provided the client access. They weren't just destroying my marriage, they were running a criminal enterprise from my dining room table, using our good name as cover for their schemes. The hardest part was watching Mark lie to my face every single day. When he claimed his phone died to explain why he hadn't answered my calls, I knew he'd been at their secret apartment. When he said he was too tired for intimacy, I knew he'd spent the afternoon making love to Monica in the bed he'd bought with our money. Each lie was a dagger, but I turned that pain into fuel for what was coming. I hired not just a divorce attorney, but a team of forensic accountants and a criminal lawyer. Mark's financial crimes weren't just affecting us. They'd stolen hundreds of thousands from his elderly clients, people who trusted him with their life savings. The FBI was very interested in the evidence I'd compiled, especially the recordings I'd made of him discussing the money transfers with Monica over dinner in our kitchen. But I needed one final piece of evidence, something that would destroy them both completely. So I did something I never thought myself capable of. I became the perfect wife. I planned elaborate dinners, surprised Mark with his favorite foods, and even suggested we renew our vows for our upcoming anniversary. His guilt made him eager to please me, and his relief at my improved attitude made him careless. That's when Mark made his fatal error. Drunk on wine and my suddenly affectionate behavior, he confessed that he'd been planning to surprise me with a business opportunity that would require him to travel frequently. This was their exit strategy. He was going to frame their disappearance as a legitimate business venture, leaving me to discover the missing money weeks later. But what Mark didn't know was that our romantic dinner conversation was being recorded by the FBI, who had wired our dining room that afternoon. Every word of his confession, every detail of their plans, every admission of financial fraud was being captured by federal agents positioned in our garden. As Mark poured himself another glass of wine, congratulating himself on his smooth deception, I excused myself to use the restroom. Instead, I sent a single text message to my attorney. Tomorrow. Execute everything. The hunter had become the hunted, and Mark had no idea that his perfect crime was about to become his perfect prison. Our 23rd wedding anniversary would indeed be unforgettable, just not in the way Mark had planned when he'd chosen it as the day to abandon me and start his new life. I woke up that morning with ice in my veins and fire in my heart. Mark was practically vibrating with nervous energy, checking his phone constantly and showering twice before breakfast. He thought he was hours away from freedom, but he was actually walking into the most elaborate trap I'd ever set. "I have a surprise for you tonight," Mark said over coffee, his voice tight with barely contained excitement. "Something that will change everything for us." I smiled sweetly and told him I had a surprise too. A special dinner reservation at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where he'd proposed decades ago. What he didn't know was that I'd also invited some very special guests to join our celebration. Throughout the day, Mark disappeared for hours, claiming he was
picking up my gift. Patricia's surveillance confirmed he was actually moving their remaining stolen funds to offshore accounts and finalizing their fake passports. Monica had already quit her job, telling everyone she was traveling to find herself. They'd planned to clean out our remaining accounts that evening and disappear before I realized what had happened. But as Mark returned home that afternoon, glowing with anticipation, FBI agents were already positioned around our house. Our daughter Emma had driven down from New York, armed with the truth I'd finally shared with her the night before. The divorce papers were ready, the criminal charges were filed, and the IRS had been notified about their tax evasion schemes. Mark's freedom countdown had become his capture countdown. I dressed carefully for dinner. A red dress he'd once said made me look stunning, jewelry he'd given me during happier times. If this was going to be our last meal together as husband and wife, I wanted to look absolutely devastating. Mark complimented my appearance, probably thinking about how he'd miss me when he was living his new life with Monica. Little did he know he'd have plenty of time to miss me from federal prison. At the restaurant, Mark's face went white when he saw Emma waiting at our table, her eyes cold with fury. "Surprise, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "Mom told me about your business opportunity with Monica. Funny thing, I've been doing some business research of my own." Emma slid a folder across the table, containing every piece of evidence we'd gathered. The offshore accounts, the embezzled client funds, the fake documents, and photographs of their criminal conspiracy. "The FBI is very interested in your entrepreneurial spirit, Dad. They're waiting outside." Mark's face crumbled as he realized he'd been outplayed by the two women he thought were too trusting to see through his lies. As federal agents approached our table, I leaned across and whispered, "Happy anniversary, darling. I hope you enjoy your new accommodations." The perfect husband was about to become the perfect defendant.
Watching my husband realize he'd been caught was almost as satisfying as watching him try to lie his way out of 22 years of evidence, until he made the mistake of blaming me for his choices. The restaurant fell silent as FBI agents flanked our anniversary table, their badges glinting under the chandelier that had once witnessed Mark's proposal. Other diners stared as Mark's hands were cuffed behind his back, but all I felt was a strange, cold satisfaction. This was justice, served at the exact moment he'd planned to destroy me. "Sarah, you don't understand," Mark pleaded, as they read him his rights. "This isn't what it looks like. I can explain everything." But explanations were 22 years too late, and I'd already heard enough lies to last several lifetimes. What could he possibly say that would justify stealing from elderly clients, embezzling our daughter's future, and planning to abandon me with nothing but debt and heartbreak? At the FBI field office, where I'd gone to provide additional evidence, I watched through one-way glass as Mark finally broke down and confessed everything. Not because he felt guilty, but because he knew the evidence was overwhelming. He detailed how Monica had seduced him with promises of a younger, more exciting life, how she'd convinced him that he deserved more than his boring marriage to me. He actually used the word boring to describe the woman who'd supported his dreams for over 2 decades. But then Mark said something that chilled me to the bone. He claimed I was partly to blame because I'd stopped making an effort after Emma left for college. According to him, my focus on my career and my emotional distance had driven him into Monica's arms. He painted himself as a victim of my neglect, a man who'd been forced to seek comfort elsewhere because his wife had failed him. The FBI agent taking his statement looked disgusted as Mark continued his blame game, describing how Monica understood him in ways I never could, how she made him feel alive again. He spoke about their stolen moments with the same reverence other people reserved for religious experiences, completely oblivious to the lives he'd destroyed to create those moments. Then, Mark made the fatal error that sealed his fate. He offered to return all the money and end the affair if I would just forgive him and work on our marriage. He
actually believed I would take him back after learning he'd stolen from innocent clients to fund his fantasy life with my accountant. I walked into that interrogation room and looked at the man I once loved with everything in my heart. "Mark," I said quietly, "the only thing I'm working on now is making sure you understand the difference between consequences and punishment." His face went white as I placed additional evidence on the table: recordings of his phone calls with Monica, proof of their plans to flee the country, and documentation of their criminal conspiracy that would ensure decades in federal prison. As I left the FBI building that night, Mark's voice echoed down the hallway, begging me to reconsider, promising to change, swearing the affair meant nothing. But some betrayals can't be forgiven, and some trust, once shattered, can never be repaired. The man I'd married was gone, and the criminal who'd replaced him was about to learn that actions have consequences.
If I thought watching my husband's arrest was satisfying, it was nothing compared to the moment Monica realized she'd been played by both of us, and that her greed had made her the perfect target for my revenge. Monica made her first mistake by trying to contact me the day after Mark's arrest. She actually had the audacity to call my cell phone, sobbing about how she never meant for any of this to happen and begging me to understand their love. Her tears meant nothing to me. Crocodile tears from a woman who'd been stealing from my family for months while smiling at our kitchen table. But Monica's second mistake was far more costly. She tried to access their secret accounts, not knowing that the FBI had already frozen everything. Her attempts to withdraw the stolen money triggered additional federal charges, and her panic led her to make increasingly desperate decisions. She actually showed up at my office, begging me to talk to the authorities and claiming she'd been manipulated by my husband. I listened to her sob story with the patience of a saint, letting her describe how Mark had seduced her with promises of love and financial security. She painted herself as another victim, a lonely woman who'd been taken advantage of by a predatory man. But I had her emails, her bank records, and her own handwriting on documents that proved she'd been the architect of much of their criminal scheme. The beautiful irony was that Monica had been so confident in her plan that she'd kept detailed records of everything: spreadsheets tracking stolen funds, calendars marking their rendezvous, even a journal describing her excitement about starting fresh with her true love. Her organizational skills, which had made her an excellent accountant, had also made her a perfect criminal defendant. Patricia's investigation revealed that Monica had been planning this seduction for over a year, carefully studying our marriage, our finances, and our vulnerabilities. She'd chosen Mark specifically because of his access to wealthy clients and his obvious midlife crisis. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated heist that used my husband's ego as the entry point. The FBI offered Monica a plea deal: testify against Mark in exchange for reduced charges. But Monica made the mistake of thinking she could manipulate me into providing character testimony that might help her case. She actually asked me to lie for her, to tell the court she was a good person who'd made one mistake. Instead, I provided the FBI with Monica's journal entries, where she'd written about stupid Sarah and how easy it would be to take everything from that pathetic housewife. Her own words became the evidence that destroyed any sympathy a jury might have had for her. When Monica realized I wouldn't help her, she tried one last desperate move. She contacted our daughter, Emma, attempting to manipulate her into believing I was being too harsh on her father. That phone call was Monica's final mistake, because Emma recorded every word and delivered it straight to the prosecution. Some people never learn when to stop digging their own graves. Watching 22 years of lies collapse like a house of cards was nothing compared to discovering how many people had been helping Mark deceive me, and how satisfying it would be to take them all down together. Mark's arrest sent shockwaves through our social circle, but not for the reasons I expected.
Instead of sympathy for my betrayal, I discovered a network of friends and colleagues who'd known about the affair and said nothing. Some had even helped Mark maintain his lies, providing alibis and cover stories while I remained blissfully unaware. Our neighbor Jim, who'd shared countless barbecues with us, admitted he'd known about Mark's friend for months. Sarah Chen, my supposed best friend from our book club, had actually helped Mark plan some of his deception, suggesting restaurants where Monica wouldn't be recognized. Even Mark's business partner, David, had been aware of the embezzlement and had chosen to look the other way in exchange for a larger share of the legitimate profits. The revelation that my entire social network had been complicit in my humiliation was almost worse than the original betrayal. These people had looked me in the eye at dinner parties, asking about my marriage with fake concern while knowing my husband was stealing from me. They'd offered relationship advice while helping him deceive me. How many conversations had they shared about poor, clueless Sarah behind my back? But their betrayal gave me power I hadn't expected. Each person who'd helped Mark had also made themselves liable for aiding financial fraud, for conspiracy, or simply for professional ethics violations. David's accounting license was revoked when the state board learned about his complicity. Jim's real estate business suffered when word spread about his character. Sarah Chen found herself expelled from every social organization we'd shared. The ripple effects of Mark's crimes were destroying the carefully constructed world he'd built around our marriage. His clients were filing lawsuits, his professional reputation was obliterated, and his family was finally seeing him for who he really was. His mother, who'd always favored him over his siblings, called to tell him he was dead to her. Even his own brother refused to post bail. But the most devastating blow came when Emma, armed with her Yale law degree, filed a civil lawsuit against Monica and Mark for the emotional distress they'd caused our family. The suit demanded not just financial compensation, but public acknowledgement of their crimes against our family. Within 6 weeks of Mark's arrest, his entire life had imploded. His business partnership dissolved, his professional licenses were suspended, and he'd become a social pariah in our small Connecticut community. The man who thought he was so clever had destroyed everything he'd spent decades building. As I watched Mark's empire crumble from the safety of my lawyer's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The lies were finally over, the truth was finally free, and justice was finally being served. But the best part? I was just getting started.
Sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't what you take from someone, it's what you give them. The opportunity to see exactly who they really are when their masks finally fall off. Mark's trial became the most talked about event in our town's recent history. The local newspaper covered every detail, from the stolen retirement funds to the fake passports. But they saved their most scandalous coverage for the revelation that Monica had been embezzling from her other clients too. We weren't her only victims. We were just her most convenient ones. In court, I watched Mark try to maintain his dignity as evidence of his crimes mounted. He wore the same confident expression he'd used when lying to my face, but now everyone could see through it. His defense attorney's strategy of blaming Monica for seducing him fell apart when prosecutors played recordings of Mark bragging about manipulating her into doing his dirty work. The predator had become the prey, and he was discovering how it felt to be deceived. Monica's testimony was the final nail in Mark's coffin. Faced with decades in federal prison, she revealed every detail of their conspiracy, including Mark's plans to eventually abandon her too once he'd secured their stolen fortune in an untraceable account. She'd thought she was stealing a husband, but she'd actually just been another victim of his manipulation. The man who'd promised to love her forever had been planning to disappear without her within 2 years. The civil trial was even more devastating. Our daughter Emma, now practicing law, personally sued them for the emotional devastation they'd caused our family.
She described growing up thinking her parents had the perfect marriage, only to discover it had been a lie. She spoke about the therapy she'd needed, the trust issues she'd developed, and the way their crimes had tainted every childhood memory of family dinners and holiday celebrations. But the most powerful moment came when Emma presented the college fund documents. The money Mark and Monica had stolen was supposed to support Emma's future children, the grandchildren Mark would now never meet from his prison cell. They hadn't just stolen money, they'd stolen generations of family dreams. Then came my moment on the witness stand. The prosecutor asked me to describe the impact of their betrayal, and I looked directly at Mark as I spoke. He didn't just cheat on me, I said. He murdered the woman who loved him unconditionally and tried to bury her under a pile of lies. But dead women tell no tales, and I have quite a story to tell. The jury's verdict was swift and merciless. Mark received 15 years in federal prison for financial fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Monica got 12 years, but the civil judgment was what truly destroyed them. They owed our family $3.2 million in damages, ensuring they'd never profit from their crimes. As Mark was led away in shackles, he turned to look at me one last time. The man who'd once promised to love me forever was finally showing me his true face, and it was the face of a stranger. I felt nothing but relief as the courthouse doors closed behind him, sealing away the biggest mistake of my life. They say living well is the best revenge, but as I stood in the ashes of my former life, I realized that living authentically is the ultimate victory over those who tried to destroy you. 6 months after Mark's sentencing, I stood in our former dining room, now empty except for the memories echoing off the walls. The house was sold, the proceeds split between legal fees and Emma's trust fund restoration. I was moving to a smaller place in Vermont, closer to Emma and farther from the ghosts of my previous life. The healing wasn't instant or easy. Some nights I still woke up reaching for someone who'd never deserved my touch. Some mornings I still caught myself setting 2 coffee cups on the counter. The muscle memory of loving someone takes time to fade, even when your brain knows they were never worthy of that love. But each day brought small victories, decisions made without consulting a liar, money spent without wondering who was really benefiting, and silence that felt peaceful instead of ominous. Emma and I had grown closer through this nightmare, bonding over the shared recognition that we'd both been deceived by someone we trusted completely. She'd started dating again, cautiously but hopefully, while I focused on rediscovering who I was without the weight of maintaining someone else's lies. We'd both learned that love requires honesty to survive, and that trust, once broken, creates either stronger boundaries or deeper wisdom. Mark wrote me letters from prison, pathetic attempts at apology that revealed he still didn't understand the magnitude of his betrayal. He wrote about missing our good times together, apparently forgetting that those same times had been corrupted by his lies. He asked for forgiveness, for visits, for a chance to explain his side of the story. I returned every letter unopened, because some conversations were already finished. Monica was released after serving 8 years, her accounting license permanently revoked, her professional reputation destroyed. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved across the country, working retail and living in a studio apartment, the glamorous life she'd dreamed of reduced to survival. The woman who thought she was stealing a successful man's fortune had ended up with nothing but regret and a criminal record. But the most unexpected twist came 2 years later, when I received a call from the FBI. Mark had been trying to run investment scams from prison, using his charisma to manipulate other inmates' families. They wanted to know if I'd testify to establish his pattern of financial manipulation, ensuring he'd serve his full sentence without parole. Standing in that courtroom, facing the man who'd shared my bed for over 2 decades, I felt no anger, no sadness, no regret. I felt free. Your Honor, this man is a predator who uses trust as a weapon. Every relationship in his life has been a transaction, Every promise has been a lie, and every person who's loved him has paid the price for his selfishness. Today, I live in a small cottage in Vermont, with a garden I tend myself and a life that belongs entirely to me. I wake up every morning knowing that no one is lying to me, stealing from me, or using my love as a cover for their crimes. Mark will be released when he's 68, with no money, no reputation, and no family waiting for him. Monica disappeared into the anonymity she deserves, and I discovered that the woman who emerged from their betrayal was stronger, wiser, and more valuable than the one they'd tried to destroy. Sometimes the greatest revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's choices define your worth.